We are live, except not live. Live to each other. Hey everyone, welcome to Youngbloods Collective Speak, Voices of Women in the Yampa Valley. Our 2021 theme is vulnerability, courage, compassion, and connection. I'm Sarah, president of the Youngbloods Collective Board, and I'll be your host. Last year, our Speak theme centered around power and leadership. Performers explored structures of patriarchy, challenging hypocrisy, and reflecting on the role of choice in power. This year, after the harrowing trials and seemingly insurmountable strains of 2020, we are exploring a new challenge for the theme of Speak. We invited participants to embrace vulnerability. Renowned shame researcher Brene Brown describes vulnerability as the culmination of courage, compassion, and connection. We're not sure what this past year looked like for you, but we needed a lot of courage, compassion, and connection to make it through. In a way, Speak has always been about vulnerability. When we invite women to share their stories and songs, we're asking them to put their lives on display. These stories build empathy and awareness of shared experiences, and yet they also invite judgment, both conscious and unconscious, and both from others and ourselves. This year, our three performers will each share a different perspective of vulnerability. After a few rehearsals, it is clear that one of the most difficult types of courage, compassion, and connection exists in the relationship that we have with ourselves. Chelsea's song, Pendulum, speaks to the courage it takes to exist as an imperfect human, as we all are, and yet is so hard to accept sometimes. Megan's song, Waiting, Hoping, speaks to the compassion we often give out so generously that we sometimes drown our own need for it. And Beth's story, Pee, Poop, Climb, reminds us that vulnerability is a two-way street when it comes to authentic connection and literal connection in her case. And new to our program this year, our performers will get the chance to tell us the candid backstory of their performance, as well as their reactions to each other's pieces. So to start off the show, we welcome Chelsea Malin.
Okay, hello. My name is Chelsea Malin, and I'm going to play a song that I wrote called Pendulum. And yeah, I think it speaks to the theme of vulnerability for a lot of reasons. But yeah, I'll tell you about them after you hear it. So. Of perception, well, I can see the appeal, but it turns out the sun will rise regardless of whether or not we believe it will. Escape is just an illusion. Wherever I go, well, there I'll be. Life is hard, but it gets worse if you stop trying, trust me. Yeah, life is hard, but it gets worse if you stop trying, trust me. Maybe you don't know me very well, because a part of me prefers to be whoever you need, so that when you leave, you won't be abandoning the real me. Perfection. Well, I don't see the appeal of that one. No. Flawed and vulnerable, I wear human skin, speckled by the sun and scarred by demons, but you don't want to see because I covered up the scars to appease you. I only wanted to please you. I only wanted to please you. The powers of projection. Well, you can't hear what you want in this song, and I'll just strum along. Maybe the risk of rejection is worth the depth of the acceptance if I'm real. Maybe you don't know me very well because you see what you want to see and you edit out the sad parts. Well, I guess that's how you see the world as well, but I'm here to tell you. Pendulum swings equally far in either direction. The pendulum swings equally far in either direction. The powers of perception. The pendulum swings equally far in either direction. The pendulum swings equally far in either direction.
Chelsea, thank you for sharing. What could you tell us about the inspiration and meaning behind the song?
Sure. So I wrote this song after the end of a pretty serious relationship. Kind of at the phase where you're trying to evaluate like how much of that was my fault, how much of that was their fault, and what can I do differently in the future, and like what I look for in another person, and also my own behavior, right? And so I have bipolar disorder, and the pendulum kind of refers to mood swings, literally swinging from one end to the other. And this partner kind of ended things once I fell into a depression. And so I really felt like, first of all, that I was abandoned when I needed him the most, right? And also that he just wasn't getting the full spectrum of like what I had to offer, really. And that like if you can't accept like one extreme of my personality or even of the world as a whole, like of the experience of life, then like how can you appreciate the other extreme fully? And yeah, I also was reflecting just on the fact that like, how was it that this person like didn't see that side of me until I fell into this episode, right? Like I didn't really share my whole self with them until I had invested so much time in the relationship. And perhaps if I had been more authentically myself from the very beginning, then I would have learned earlier on that he wasn't gonna be able to appreciate that side of me. So that's what the song is about. Yeah.
Thanks. Did he know? Out of curiosity.
I told him, but like, frankly, like telling someone that you have a mental illness is a lot different than them living with you while you're having symptoms of a mental illness. Like, to be fair, like that is a unique experience that it's hard to prepare someone for, really. Yeah.
I get that. It almost like it's different knowing. It's like you told him like logically, and then when you actually showed him, yeah, this is what it's actually like.
Yeah, I think he was just somebody that like had a really hard time dealing with like heavy topics or like dark things. And I don't know. I just am of the opinion, like, not that, like, I'm very thankful to have found treatment where my mood swings are like probably not within the range of a person who doesn't have bipolar disorder, but like manageable. You know, I can hold down a professional job and stuff. Um, but like sometimes I feel like it's a blessing and a curse, because I do think that like if you don't explore like the darker parts of life, if you don't experience like depth of like what we consider negative emotions, then like you don't really get the full spectrum, or you can't fully appreciate how good it feels to be on the other end of it.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. I actually really like that thought, Chelsea, because I, at least, so in my profession, I'm a licensed social worker and I'm a school counselor. And something that I often find myself saying to, you know, clients, family, children, is that without conflict and without struggle and without obstacle, you don't grow. You know, you grow as a person in the moments that you find yourself pushed up against a wall, when you find yourself on the floor crying, right, in a state of depression, whatever it is. I feel like those are the challenges that really help us see who do we want to be in those moments, you know, and where do we want to go from here, and how do we want to come out of this on the other side. And it really helps put, I think, our life into perspective. I think it really helps celebrate those positive times when you have those negative times, because it's I agree with you. I think that you oftentimes appreciate the things that you have when you understand the depth of what you could lose. So I don't know. I totally agree with you, and I really like that sentiment.
Yeah, I really relate to that idea of like holding back like that imperfect part of yourself, because like you're living with this assumption that, well, no one's going to want that anyway. So like let's just leave that out. But then also needing to like show that to somebody so that you risk that rejection in order to get that deeper acceptance. And even like in some relationships, it's like, okay, if they don't know that part of you, do they know you at all? Like, yeah, I don't know. Like I struggle with that too. What, like Beth and Megan, what else do you relate to with this song?
One thing I really appreciated about the piece is it, you know, I think that a lot of people actually are, you know, loving, caring people, mean well. But when people in our lives say and really intend to be there for us, or and just cannot, I think in my experience, I've observed that I have a feeling that people are scared of the darkness in themselves, right? And when someone can't hold to be there, I think, you know, it can be really challenging realizing that not just for yourself, but for whomever is around you, someone you love and really care for, that you can't fix it. One, you can't fix it even if you needed to, and it's not, and nothing, and then when it comes down to the person, no one needs to be fixed also. But when this discomfort with something that feels heavy and hard and maybe scares you about maybe something that taps into something deep in yourself, I think it, you know, people aren't actually able to hang by you.
No, I love that, Beth. And sorry, I'm going to jump in on it, but I love that you bring up fixing, because I think that's something that comes up a lot in mental health practice, is that I think sometimes people believe that therapy is going to fix them. I think that sometimes people who have mentally ill individuals in their life really think that they're going to be fixed at some point with medication or with therapy or, you know, X, Y, and Z, right? But when we look at people who have been diagnosed with mental illness, that there's something wrong with them because of that. It's just so problematic to me. I don't like that at all. And I think one of my hopes and one of my dreams of Speak in this conversation that we're having on vulnerability, since mental illness is something that kind of plays through, I think, several of our pieces, you know, it's so important to destigmatize that conversation and to really unpack this whole concept of that we don't need to fix people, right? We need to love people for where they're at and love them through these things. And it's okay to have boundaries, and it's okay to have like those things that keep us safe and protected, right? We do have to put our own oxygen mask on first before we care for others. But I truly believe that we don't need to fix people, right? We don't need to, because we wouldn't do that with physically ill people, right? We might want to do treatment, sure, but we don't need to fix people. And so I really like your thoughts around that, Beth. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that another thing that kind of comes up for me in this is just Chelsea sharing about her, you know, telling her partner about it, and then telling somebody versus them experiencing it is a very different thing. And I think part of the issue with that, with mental illness, is the representations that we see on the screen and representations that we see in media. And I think we do a very big disservice to all mental illness, but I think bipolar is one of the ones that we do a really bad job in film and media. And it's unfortunately something that I do believe is so stigmatized, and there's just countless examples on the screen that is that are upsetting and that are not accurate, right? And so I wonder if, you know, I just have a wonder if part of that, you know, telling people is one thing, experiencing it is another, because I don't feel like our thought about what the mental illness is the reality. So again, I think there's a lot of education that could be done. I think there's a lot of work as a country that we could do around this topic.
I totally agree. And I think that like bipolar women in particular are almost like romanticized in a lot of media, like the manic pixie dream girl, like just being kind of erratic and like wacky. And yeah, that might be true sometimes. But also there's like a flip side to that. And yeah, that's not like a whole person, that's a character.
One thing, Chelsea, I think you do a really good job about too is talking about the pendulum as being an opportunity, right? That you actually miss out. And I think that is counterintuitive for a lot of us, right? You know, we don't think about darkness and hard things as an opportunity. In my own life, right, I managed depression, and in the harder moment, harder period of all of that, I was really surprised to discover that people had this perception of brokenness. I never had that influence in my life as strong, and I was really surprised by that. And it didn't make any sense to me at a logical nor emotional level, because if you look at any being, they're not broken, they're a whole being. You know, like a tree branch. It's so cheesy, but I used to vent to people. I'm like, if you see like a tree with a broken branch, they're not like less of a tree, you know, or something stupid like that, right?
Maybe I've got some things I think need fixing, but I mean, there's some, you know, some like behaviors that I'm, you know, not proud of, like, which we all have and that we all want to improve and grow beyond. And yet, like, I wonder how much my own perception of that influences the way that other people see them. Like, I wonder whether other people are going to accept them the way that I've come to accept them.
Well, Sarah, I think you point something out that's really important just now too, that a lot of the stigma when we talk about stigma, a great lot of it is internalized. And what do? You know, how do you deal or face an internal stigma? Well, sometimes you just like any challenging thing, sometimes you have to sit with it. You know, just like if you have a friend going through a hard time and you're not trying to fix it,
we have our own internal stigmas. You know, there's a line between wanting, you know, personal growth and being ashamed and feeling that internal stigma. I think sometimes the most surprising stigma is the one we have inside of ourselves.
I think I was actually listening to a podcast from Brene Brown, who was mentioned in Sarah's intro, but she was a big influencer of why we did the theme of vulnerability. She's my favorite social worker. She's amazing. Anyway, I was listening to her podcast today, and there was an episode on what is the difference between shame and accountability, and how does that look? And a lot of it is that internalization piece, right? And really, shame is more about, you know, hating who you are and tying it to your identity. I feel like these themes keep coming up, right? Identity, I feel like, is one that kind of comes through. And then accountability is owning the behaviors, right? Owning that there are things that you do not like, but that it's not that you don't like you, it's that you don't like that you do X, Y, and Z, right? So it's externalizing those behaviors is a big part of the accountability piece versus the versus shame.
As women, so much of ourselves is often tied to what we have to offer other people. In our relationships, in our families, and in our careers, we aspire to these archetypes, and like the wife, the girlfriend, the boss, the daughter, the sister, the mother. And though I don't think this is inherently a bad thing, but when we fail to achieve these perfectly, it can feel like a fundamental threat to our identity. So, up next, going along with this theme, is Megan Whiteheis.
Hello, I'm Megan Whiteheis, and yeah, I've been playing music. I think I taught myself guitar when I was about 18, but I've been playing music for as long as I can remember, and singing and making up songs. So yeah, I'm excited to share this piece with you. And it's really all about becoming a mother for the first time. And so that is one of the things that is really exciting. The last time I did speak, I was 8.5 months pregnant, I think. So it's a little crazy to think about that. So my piece is called Waiting, Hoping. Keep waiting to not be so desperate for your touch. Keep hoping I won't love you quite so much. Will the fire within me fade into a spark? Will I finally stop feeling the uncertainty of dark? Baby, please give me back myself. Baby, please, will you let me live? Baby, please give me back my body and my mind. You keep taking bit by bit. I've lost myself so completely. Can't live my life without you in it. Keep waiting to not be haunted by my dreams. I keep hoping I won't rip my heart's fragile strings. Will the fire within me fade into a spark? Will I finally stop fearing the uncertainty of dark? Baby, please give me back myself. Baby, please, will you let me live? Baby, please, give me back my body and my mind. Taking bit by bit. I've lost myself so completely. Can't live my life without you in it. I'm drowning in self-doubt. Will I ever be good enough? Will I ever be strong enough? Will I ever again just get to be me? Baby, please give me back myself. Baby, please, will you let me live? Baby, please, give me back my body and my mind. Taking bit by bit. Lost myself so completely. Can't live my life without you in it. Keep waiting to have some semblance of myself. Keep hoping won't put parts of me on a shelf. Will the fire within me fade into a spark? Will I finally start living? I should go wild and make my mark. Baby, please give me back myself. Baby, please, will you let me live? Baby, please, give me back my body and mind. You keep taking bit by bit. I need to find myself again. In my life, I let go of perfect.
Thanks, Megan. I remember with our weird adaptation of like 2020 Speak, I think that we ended up releasing your video on like the day that you went into labor.
I did, yeah. I think it was the day my son was born. Is the day
My
that we
bad.
released it, which was it was super wild. So
Yeah. So it's cool to see this come full circle. So
yeah.
what can you tell us about the about your experience behind this song?
Yeah. So I initially wrote this piece because when we're talking about the themes of vulnerability and what vulnerability means, and to me, vulnerability is really all about getting real and authentic, and it's about emotional exposure, and but just being like really true to yourself too. And so after I gave birth, it was a really crazy process. Becoming a mom is like it's just such a life-altering thing, as any parent would tell you. But I definitely had postpartum depression afterwards, and it was really, really tough. I think the first 2 weeks home from the hospital, I feel like I probably cried every day, every hour. It was one of those where it was just really, really hard. And then, on top of all of that, it was also the pandemic. So, because I gave birth at the end of April, so the pandemic hit at the very end of March, beginning of April. So it was really wild. It was not the birth story I wanted, but you deal with the cards that you get dealt, and so it was kind of nuts in that way. But I wrote the piece about my experience with postpartum and my experience into motherhood, and I really felt like being a mom was a lot about letting parts of yourself go, at least temporarily, and discovering a new identity in this new human. And to me, the song really is kind of a parallel between a toxic relationship and motherhood. And I don't totally feel like those are two separate things sometimes. I I love my small human more than anything in the world, and also it is just really challenging to separate yourself from them and to have this different identity as an individual, as well as a parent, as well as a mom. And you feel like, I don't know, I mean, if anyone has ever heard of babies being like parasites, I I don't ever want to say that, because children are a blessing. But at the same time, though, it very much is like you do totally lose yourself in this process of becoming a mom, and you're almost rebirthed as this new person on top of birthing another small human. So it was a wild ride. I feel like now, singing the song and playing the song, I wrote the song in the fall when I was still more of a newer mom. Now my son is 1 and it feels a little bit less new. I feel a little bit like I have it together sometimes. So it doesn't feel as fresh. But I think when I wrote the song, it was very therapeutic. And I think this song people will be able to relate to, not only if you're a parent or a mother or whatever. I think also people will relate to this if they've ever felt like they have lost part of themselves in a relationship. And so that can be a number of different relationships, right? It can be, a toxic relationship that you're in, where the partnership is not equal, where you don't feel like you're empowered, right? When you're giving up that agency. Definitely, I think people will relate to this song too. But for me, this was really about, it was really hard, because as a 30 something year old woman, it it was, I feel like I'm very established in my identity and very much, um I have the things I like and I do my life the way that I do my life, and I'm in these kind of patterns and habits and things like that, and I'm very comfortable in my relationship with my husband and these things. But to have something disrupt it so completely so that you have to rework everything about yourself. That's what the song's about.
Yeah, I don't know that I would get that sense like when I first heard it. So it's interesting to hear that that perspective that you wrote it with. It's hard to think of a more intimate relationship than motherhood, especially one to lose yourself in.
Yeah.
And I'm not a mother, but even before hearing your inspiration, the song even makes me think of my own past relationships or even jobs where I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. And yeah, and I'd love to ask Chelsea and Beth what, like, how they can relate to the song, and if they've ever been in this type of situation where they felt like had lost themselves.
Yeah, so actually, I think that I have always invested a lot of time in community, and it was when I had finally invested in an intimate, long-term intimate partnership, and it didn't work out. That it just, and I kind of allude to that a little bit in my own piece. Um, it was kind of the confluence of those two things where I felt like both my sense of self in connected to community and at a very intimate level was kind of upside down a bit. And I and it's I don't think it's a terminal path, but I definitely think I know who I am. And but there was a period during that time where you kind of question yourself, like, and it takes some time to once the storm settles a little bit to be grounded again in those really deep parts of yourself, right? Interesting enough, storytelling was one of the things that rose to the surface immediately during that period.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the song, like the last word of it is perfect. Because I think that any kind of setting or relationship where that's what I was striving for, like was to be perfect or to seem perfect to someone else, like those are the situations where I felt like I've lost myself. So yeah, it's interesting. I think that maybe vulnerability is in a way like letting go of the desire to be perfect. And in order to be true to yourself, you really have to just allow yourself to be authentic and not live up to other people's expectations of you or even your own expectations of you that aren't true to who you are, right?
Yeah, it's vulnerability is I think like what we've learned in our time together is that it's such a paradox in that it's so personal and yet it's so dependent on the existence of others witnessing it and seeing us in that, like, this authenticity that we're talking about, like that that trueness. And so up next, going along with this theme, we're going to welcome Beth Laidley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Laidley. So I chose kind of a lighthearted piece to talk about something a little more complex. I find myself in kind of an interesting period of life, and I'll talk about that. And you know, in my learning through this stage, I guess I found a real connection through this funny piece. So without further ado, I'll share it, and I'm happy to answer questions. So as I was saying, I find myself in this really kind of interesting chapter in life. I actually have recently discovered at the ripe age of 38 that I might not have any idea what I'm doing. And to celebrate this not knowing, I recently made the novel decision to quit a professional job in public health that helped many people and that I did not particularly like. I did so too for a time to spend time with nice people, to pet wiggly puppies at a pet store. And I spent the last year especially grounded in this mantra that I want to do more for more people while I was pretty miserable most days. And at the end of my first day working at the pet store, the owner showered me in praise, and I held a 4-month-old puppy nestled under my chin. So all anxiety, stomach aches aside, not so bad so far. Many people have asked me what my plan is, and this is not an unreasonable question. However, I have not much more other to say other than I really do not know. One friend has generously offered the phrase midlife shift, which let's be honest is just crisis's nicer cousin. And all I can say is I need a different approach. And it is a bit uncomfortable, as all big changes are. Like so often is the case, the discomfort to accept that I do not know and still make a choice is complemented with a relief and a lifted weight too. This is certainly not the first time I've taken a leap or a risk, and it is not the first time I've fumbled, taken a wrong turn, been uncomfortable, or even made myself a fool. Some choices I've made, some chances I have paid off immediately, and others have left me licking wounds for years. More often than not, taking chances have left me with a mixture of difficulty, richness, deep learning, a stronger sense of humility, and a truer understanding of compassion than before. It's possible that I may have made an error this time, but chances are this will work out too. It has before. And one such chance was when I met my friend Gary. I met Gary when I went to Mexico to climb. I went solo for a time and just met people at this area. It was shortly after one of the worst moments of my life, and I didn't really know if I was going to be okay again. My life had proverbially met the point when shit hit the fan. I'd spent my life doing human rights and community work, supported by holding many jobs and living pretty uncomfortably without much. But for a time, however, I had a partner and didn't have to count my pennies. We spent our time climbing and building a life together, and we were happy. I forced a decision to try to do more for more people again, and it didn't work out, or at least it didn't work out the way that I'd hoped it would. I earned a master's degree, completed a short little documentary, published research, and became a doula. And my partner had an affair. And so you know what followed after all of that. It wasn't so much the affair. It was that I tried so hard to do what was right for others for so long, and yet felt so depleted, so inadequate. I was overwhelmed by a sense that I wasn't only not enough, but something ugly and unworthy. Like I said, shit hit the fan. Things got hairy, and I did the only thing I thought would be useful at all. I left to go climbing. Gary, too, had parted with his long-term partner and was coming to climb away some of the pain. In this great time of sadness, we found each other in the one place we could be joyful against all odds, on sharp, pointy rocks. Just kind of funny. Our friendship was greatly forged by laughter, shared accomplishment, and finding ourselves immediately in uncomfortable situations. One such situation was on a 9-pitch, about 900 feet climb, of what name I have no idea. I'll forever call it the pee poop climb. The climb started out just fine. Gary led the first pitch. I led the second two. As I called down to him to let him know that he could climb up to me and yelled, "Climb on," he yelled he had to take a poop. This is not common for this sort of day climb. There was no hauling involved for some big wall adventure. This was a semi-long climb you could do after a leisurely breakfast with a Snickers bar in your pocket and ambling down to the road to make tacos at the end of the day. It just was not a common experience. As I sat in a hanging belay about 300 feet off the ground, I watched in surprise as Gary took himself completely off the rope. He ran into a small little bush on the ledge he was on. As in a hanging belay, I should explain for those who do not know, is when you are hanging from the anchor with your feet against the wall, but you do not have a ledge or something to stand on. You are there comfortably hanging in your harness with a lot of air below you. In my case, I was hundreds of feet up watching my friend find a truly grotesque way to lighten his load while not ruining the scenery for other climbers behind us. The rest of the climb went without a hitch, hundreds of feet up sharp limestone, swapping leads, and topping out on this tiny little pinnacle of a peak, not quite big enough for both of us to stand on. It was at this point I knew that there was no way I could find myself to the bottom of the climb without peeing first. It was an uncomfortable, unfortunate realization. I'd spent hours with my harness getting tighter and tighter as we climbed, with my bladder pushing against the harness more and more snugly. This could not wait any longer. There was no way I could take my harness off either, where we were hanging, and there wasn't much of a ledge, as I explained, to speak of. I managed to scurry up a few little feet above Gary to find a place to pee. Now, peeing in your harness without taking your pants off is not only for males. As a female, I recommend stretchy pants. As I prepared by scooping my stretchy pants underneath to the front of my harness, I let it all go. It was awesome. The relief of peeing after climbing with such discomfort for so long was amazing. I was euphoric. However, this euphoria did not last long, as I realized I'd scooped my pants into a tiny little bowl, perfect to pee right into, filling my pants with urine. It takes a lot of self-acceptance and humor to crawl down a small little gully to a new friend to share the news that you had in fact wet yourself completely. We both shared a chuckle and went ahead with our plan to simul-rappel rather than rappel singularly. Now, simul-rappelling takes a lot of trust in your partner. Rather than going it alone, going down, rappelling, you are with your partner, one on one side of the rope and you on the other. If one of you messes up on your side of the rope, both of you are in trouble. In this case, if one of you wets yourself completely, both of you are working very hard to not laugh while not coming into direct contact with your partner's hindside. Yeah. As I stuck my butt out away from him, Gary slid down the rope a little faster, just a little ahead of me. We spent our time laughing as we made it down each rappel about 100 feet at a time. And over the course of the next several weeks, Gary and I climbed just about 100 pitches together, close to 10,000 feet. We ate at the Pizza Seafood restaurant in town. We looked at the stars and each wept a bit about our lost loves and our fear about what was to come ahead. We came to climb not to escape our lives, but to save them. Well, we came and left by ourselves. We left a little bit less alone than we had been before. There are times you can slink away and let shame or fear get the best of you. Other times we are forced to find joy in our fumbles and to also trust not just yourself, but whomever is on the other end of the rope with you, trying very hard not to touch your pee-soaked ass, but nevertheless with you all the way. While I don't really know what I'm doing, I have to trust that this will be just one more challenge, one more story to tell. I do hope that it is not as painful as some have been, but rather one accompanied by some smiles. I don't really have an idea of what new approach this will be. I've taken a number of routes already. I do know if I stay, if I don't change, if I don't try, I might just lose something greater. So while I figure it all out or not, I guess I'll just climb on.
Thank you, Beth. For those out there listening, we all did a double take when Beth told us the title. Like, did we hear pee, poop, climb? Like, is that what she said correctly? But it is such a metaphor for this fully letting go of this facade of perfection. Beth, what other times in your life have you felt that type of vulnerability? And were you able to laugh about it like you did in this case?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I've taken a number of risks. I've not followed a straight path, so to speak. And I, in thinking about the question, I was reminded of a time when I was working as a human rights worker. I worked in Guatemala and Mexico for a couple of years, and it took some time. There were a number of months where it took me a while to get comfortable. It was really uncomfortable. You talk about having, no personal space or no, I'll just put it this way, you're put in really vulnerable situations, working with really vulnerable populations. I often refer to myself or share with people that I'm a light heavy, I have a light and heavy side. And it took me a good while to tap into that light side. And I remember when I moved to Mexico and started doing work in one community, it was a really intense situation. The police had invaded the community and had destroyed their milpa or cornfields. And we went from 2 human rights workers to 16 overnight. And my, 1 or 2 week little stay in the community turned into a few months. And I remember I'd been at it for a while, this work, and there were a lot of new human rights workers. And I got through that. I was literally standing guard with community members. And I remember I would do silly crap like I made a cartoon ad of the singles ad that I posted in the basketball field where I joked about where I was buscando para un hombre con chile pozo. I was looking for a good man with chile pozo, and just trying to make people laugh. And I remember just dancing to the marimba and playing with kids in the outside in the rain. And I just and I I think that story came to the surface because I think the process of finding humor in really crappy situations or just really challenging situations takes time. And sometimes, I think in the harder times, less comical, less impressive moments of my life, I've been really annoyed and even pissed at the silver lining, like really tired of the silver lining, but it's after the fact, and that it is that dark humor sometimes even perverse humor that ultimately kind of can get you through some of that. So that's another story that kind of came to mind. I do think you have to write it out a little bit, and that with my piece I shared today, that just not to me maybe it's a little cheesy to say climb on, but I do think you just have to keep going.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear you talk about this. Like, oh well, like, yeah, you'll just keep going, and about like how you face these times of fear and uncertainty, like beyond just the climbing experience, and just pushed on and tried other routes anyway. Sometimes out of necessity, because like what else are you going to do but be like, well, I peed myself, I guess let's keep going. But so also sometimes out of that courage too, of like, what other choice is there? Like, what do you, yeah, like you said, you have more to lose by not doing that, so you might as well just do it anyway. I'd love to ask Chelsea and Megan to see if they could relate to this idea of risk.
Yeah, I actually wanted to hop in on the humor conversation too. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't tie in parenthood and I mean, I already mentioned in my piece, right, that I was struggling with postpartum depression after I gave birth to my son. But man, I tell you what, there were so many times when literally, I would be peed or shit on, and I just had to kind of roll with the punches, right? And the thing is, sometimes you just have to laugh so that you don't cry, right? And so I'm just a huge believer in that. So I really wanted to get in on that. But the risk-taking thing, I really don't feel like there can be risk without reward. Yeah, you have to really put it on the line sometimes in order to move forward in life. When I was first moving out to Colorado, actually, I was just a starry-eyed girl, and I was graduating with the very prestigious degree of being an English major, and that was a very exciting time. And so because of that, I didn't know what the hell to do with my life, and I moved out to Colorado to do an AmeriCorps program. And because of that, though, the whole trajectory of my life changed. But that was a huge risk for me because I had lived in my hometown my whole life up until that point. And I moved out to be in a place where I didn't know anybody for a job that I didn't know I could do, for pay that I knew I couldn't live on. And it was a big risk. And also, because I moved out to Colorado, because I took that job, it changed the entire trajectory of my life. And it is why I am now a social worker. It is why I found my partner. It is why I am a mother. So I can attribute all of those things to that one life choice, which was a huge risk at the time, because I had every reason to stay. My family was there. I had a well-paying job. I was taking a pay cut, and it was a scary thing to move to a place I didn't know anybody, but it was worth it. And I'm grateful that I made that choice.
How about you, Chelsea? How could you relate?
I can definitely relate to I've also done quite a bit of traveling, and I love the outdoors. And there have been a lot of situations in my life where I've been like, if I live, this will be a great story. You know what I mean? And I think a lot, like the people who were with me in those moments can probably tell you that like I was probably hysterically laughing. Like, for example, one time I was like getting to a trailhead in Chile, in Patagonia, and we had to go through this farm. I was with my friend Masha, who's Russian, and like we rounded a corner and realized we were in a huge field of bulls, like cows and bulls and calves. And I was like, oh my God, this is insanely dangerous. And she had no awareness that it was dangerous. She was just like, oh, la-di-da, walking around. And I was like, you could seriously get trampled by a bull right now. And then one of them started like, so I was telling her, I was like, stay by the tree line, always have your eye on a tree that you can climb really fast in case a bull charges us. And then sure enough, one of them started kicking its feet on the ground like it was going to charge us. And I was like, go, climb the tree now. We like drop our bags and we climb up the tree. And then like the bull was at the bottom of the tree, like looking up at us. And we were just like taking Snapchats and laughing. So I do think that like I don't know, it's partially adrenaline, but it's also like, I don't know. Sometimes you just have to laugh so that you don't cry, right? Like, I don't know how long I was going to be in that tree. So yeah. And I think Beth talked a lot about like getting through like difficult things and like trying something new, even when you're feeling like really beat down. And like I think it's interesting because one of the lines in my song is like, life is hard, but it gets worse if you stop trying. Trust me. And I think that's true. Like you just have to keep going, right?
I really appreciate you mentioned that line from your song, Chelsea, because I have sat with that lyric for a while and have definitely had my own period where I gave up or tried to just gave up. Like I was done. And or I felt like it, you know what I mean? And it is a less inspiring, it's not the sort of story that I love to share. It's not the fun part of life. And it is, I don't know if you guys have things like this in your life, but climbing, I often have had to qualify in my life as being really important. But I do think having things that keep you going, whether it be climbing or your kids, if you're lucky to have it be a parent or music or something like this, rather than have to question the value of that. I think that it's okay. It's not some monumental thing for the rest of the world to, if it's important and helps you keep going, I think that's going to have value. But anyway, I really appreciate that lyric in your song.
Yeah. And, going back to the humor, I always felt like if I could laugh at something, it's not that powerful over me. Like I'm the one who's kind of taken that power back. And if I can laugh at it, then that means like I'm in control. It's okay. It's not going to beat me down. Like I can make it through. I always thought about, yeah. I love to use humor in that way. Okay, so as we are starting to wrap up our show, knowing that everybody's on their own journey and advice might not be the best thing to ask for, but for closing thoughts, like what lessons about vulnerability have you learned through this experience that you could pass on to others?
Yeah, I've got a thought. So one thing that comes up for me a lot working with kids. So I mentioned I'm a school counselor. One of the things that comes up a lot is self-esteem, and it's something that I think a lot of kids struggle with, and I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. They don't feel comfortable in their own skin, and I feel like that's really where vulnerability starts, is feeling comfortable with yourself and being okay with this concept that you are not perfect, right? You are a human that very much makes mistakes, and that is okay. And so that's one of the big themes of art, I think, this rendition of Speak this year. But one of the things that I leave with my students is, would you say that to your best friend? So some of the internal dialogue that we have in our heads, for instance, regarding my piece and my questioning, am I good enough? I think my line is, I'm drowning in self-doubt. Will I ever be good enough? Will I ever be strong enough? Will I ever again just get to be me? Those were very much some thoughts I had when I was in the midst of postpartum depression. And would I ever question if my best friend was good enough? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Because I think it's really easy for us to lift up the people that we love in our lives, but we need to love ourselves as much as we love our friends, as much as we cherish our family and our friendships. We need to do that for ourselves, because again, just to reiterate that point of of putting on that oxygen mask first. I know that self-care is kind of this buzzword right now, especially in the era of a pandemic, but holy shit, is it so important. Sorry, I hope we can swear, Sarah. But it's something that's so crucial, I think, to the time that we live in. And it is a very, very difficult task to do, especially given that I don't think we feel as connected these days as we have in the past, doing things virtually, kind of like how we're doing now, instead of doing live performances, right? It can feel a bit disconnecting just given the state that we're behind a computer screen instead of sitting in front of you. So I think really making sure that you're having those positive self-talk going on in your head and saying to yourself, would I say this to my best friend? What would I say to my best friend? And saying that to yourself.
Well, one thing I would point out that is so often is the case with sharing. Like it's interesting that in the format of this event, right? We are all sharing different stories, which it is through sharing our stories that you're able to connect, right? I think, Sarah, you introduced the event saying, it is inherently vulnerable to share your story, right? But it's through taking the risk and sharing the story that you're able to see the commonality. And I think we're able to really connect with each other's stories. And I think that is often the case. Like if in the world, we often think, someone can't possibly love that part of me or something like that. We can see this is actually probably a pretty common experience. Another thing I think I really offer is that not everything's comfortable, and it doesn't have to be changed. Discomfort doesn't have to be immediately changed. And it's not so much a masochism to have to be in pain or anything like that, but it's right. Keep going, one thing at a time, keep going, breathe through it, and just continue to have the confidence and acceptance of what is, rather than really trying to force what we think we need to be, or wanting the situation to be different than it is. Like using the climbing is a good example. Like you can't make what you have in front of you any different. You have to work with what you have.
I love that idea of like, it's not a matter of escaping that discomfort, but maybe rather finding meaning in it. Like you say, like, it's not a matter of changing it. It's a matter of sitting with it and maybe learning from it too. Like, what can I get out of this really vulnerable experience that is meaningful and purposeful? Yeah. How about you, Chelsea?
Well, I think the common thread for me in these pieces is identity, and then also our relationships with other people, and how much of ourselves we reveal. And I think it was interesting to hear all of these different perspectives on that, because mine was kind of a story of rejection. Beth's was a story of finding someone who accepts you when you're vulnerable. And Megan's person is kind of unresponsive. So, I mean, she's a baby, right? Right? Okay. So sorry. He's a baby. And so I think for me, while it's nice to have, and important, I think, to have total acceptance from some people in your life. Thank you, Megan. The response that you get from being vulnerable isn't necessarily what's the most valuable thing about it. It's actually the practice of doing it, of trying it. And even if you are faced with rejection or being shit on by a baby, you learn something from it, and there's value in it. So yeah, and just the practice of being vulnerable.
I had one last thought.
Yeah.
And it's this, so I don't know enough about it. So I'm gonna sound a little silly here, but I feel like there's a new buzzword going around right now. And it's called radical self-love. And radical self-love, I feel like, is just kind of, I don't know, I feel like a little bit that's what Chelsea was getting at, is that you very radically got to accept yourself as you are, man. And it's okay, right? It's going to be all right. Just like it's okay when we get peed and pooped on a climb. It's okay that we have mental illness. It's okay that, we might not feel good enough sometimes. All of those things are okay. And it just makes us people and who we are. And, um, you know, it's kind of boring when people are perfect, and it's boring. People aren't perfect, but life is boring and it's not interesting when you don't have differences, when you don't have diversity, right? That is what makes life so sweet. So I think radically accepting ourselves is a really good lesson to have.
Yeah, totally. Like, I think that like rejection, like the experience of rejection has actually brought me toward better self-acceptance.
Thank you so much for supporting this year's production of Youngblood's Collective's Speak, Voices of Women in the Yampa Valley. To learn more about our organization, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or look up our website at youngbloodscollective.org.